use it for powering cars and stuff like that. And then when we realize we have to build solar panels or whatever, you know, wind power or these kind of things, it takes energy to do that. And initially it'll be CO2 because we have, you know, fossil fuel power plants. Eventually it'll be replaced by the renewables. So those are some of the issues. Well, in front there first. Yeah. That particular chart is 650,000 years. They have gone farther. You know how they get that? They drill holes in the Arctic, and every level there's trapped gas in the ice, and they can measure the CO2 content in the ice and look at ionization to figure out the temperature and things like that. That's by the way, I didn't cover a lot of the basics about climate change and how we know what we know. I think the movie An Inconvenient Truth does a really good job of that, and I certainly recommend anyone who hasn't seen it to see it. It's really good about the why and the hows and stuff. It doesn't go into what's going to happen very much, but in terms of the basic educational stuff about climate change, which I kind of skip in this talk, it's actually pretty good. So it talks about that, and in books, and I forget how far they can go back now, but they can go back many, you know, tens of millions of years using other sediments of the ocean and rock and things like that. With what I'm saying here, that other scientists like Freeman Dyson disagree. First of all, if your child had cancer, you would probably take them to a doctor, not a car mechanic, not a statistician. Probably take them to a doctor. And not just any doctor. You take them to an oncologist. And not just any oncologist, you probably take them to a pediatric oncologist. You would probably do that. This is the same thing. The people that know what the problem is are climate scientists. 97% of climate scientists agree essentially with what I'm saying here today. Now, Freeman Dyson doesn't, and there are meteorologists that disagree, there are geologists that disagree, but you can find people disagreeing about everything. This stuff, by the way, the fact that CO2 heats the atmosphere, this is like physics. There's no controversy whatsoever. You can measure it in the laboratory, right? There's no controversy whatsoever. The only controversy is how much will the atmosphere heat up? But it's already heating up. And all the data so far shows that it's actually worse than the conservative predictions before. The actual data, the Arctic is melting much faster. You can't explain that any other way except for soot, perhaps. Well, the temperatures in the last, most of the temperatures in the last 10 years have been the hottest ever. 1998 was a little warmer. I'm going to give you a prediction right now. The next 5 years, some of the years in the next 5 years will be the hottest years ever in recent history, because two things that happened recently that keep the temperatures. By the way, last year, 2008, was a, quote, relatively cool year. Still one of the top 10 hottest years ever, but a little cooler than 1998. So people say, oh, it's getting cooler now. Two things have been happening. It's been La Nina cycle in the last 5 years, and the sun has sunspots that go in 11-year cycles, and we're at a solar minimum. Those two things added together has cooled the Earth a tiny bit and made those last couple of years a little tiny bit cooler than they would have been, and only a tiny bit cooler than they've been in 1998, but still far warmer than the last 30 years ago, let's say. The next 5 years, both those things are reversing. It's turning into into El Nino year, which is going to warm up already, and also the sun's going to start putting out a little bit more. Those two things are going to put us back on track. And so I have to say, personally, these scientists that say, these non-climate scientists who say this stuff are wrong. Einstein, when he came to the United States, the Germans were kind of unhappy with him. He's pretty famous for his theory of relativity. So they put out a book, 100 Scientists Against Relativity. And someone asked Einstein about it. He said, well, if I was wrong, it would only take one. So the fact that they have these lists of scientists who disagree, they're just getting all the people that don't know what they're talking about to sign something. That's a really easy thing to do. Climate scientists, you talk to them, they're the ones studying it every day. By the way, they don't want this to be true. I mean, this concept that they have some reason to do this, they would win a Nobel. If someone would prove this is wrong, you'd get a Nobel Prize. There's no incentive to say this unless it's true. So I have to say I disagree. There we go. It was never really, what, nuclear winter? Thank God it didn't happen. You know what nuclear winter is? You're talking about global cooling. That is true. If we took all the pollution out of the atmosphere tomorrow, the temperature would double. And the global warming temperature would double. It would go up another degree immediately. So the pollution, but nuclear winter means you have a nuclear war and you block out sunlight and everything dies. So that will still happen if we have a nuclear war. Right, you're talking about pollution. So it is true that pollution has artificially been cooling the planet off. And you can even look back after the war, we industrialized and the temperature dropped. And then we passed the Clean Air Act. And then right after that, the temperature started going up again. It was going to go up anyway because climate change was catching up to the pollution, and now it's ahead. But that's a problem, actually. As we clean up the air and switch to renewable fuels, we're going to have less pollution. That's going to cause the temperature to go up. So that's actually, things are complicated. That's what geoengineering is. That's what putting sulfates in the air is. It's artificially putting, well, whatever you say, putting smoke in the air to reflect sunlight. Now, there are other bad things that happen when you do that, but that is a near-term solution, if you want to call it that, to maybe preventing the Arctic from melting too fast. But you better you better be spending your time really fast sucking the CO2 out of the air, because that's only essentially a temporary solution, 2050, and we really better do that. I think it turns out you can do in the short run, there's so much you can do. I mean, so much, we put out twice as much CO2 per person as anywhere else in the world except for like Australia. Even Europe, compared to Europe, we put out twice as much as Europe. Europe 5 times more than the average Chinese, right? So there's a lot we can do just by thinking smarter. You can change your light bulbs at home tomorrow, and that would have a huge impact. I don't know when it kicks in, but they're banning incandescent bulbs. That's a really smart thing to do. You save money, you save energy. So there's a lot of things you can do right now that might have a longer payback, but are still financially smart things to do. And you can get down 20%. Most companies that have done this have found out they save money. You know, Walmart's a great example. They did all these things to help their PR, and they ended up saving hundreds of millions of dollars, too, at the same time. So just thinking smarter and what's good about the personal stuff, although it's not enough, because even if you do it, and not everybody does it, it won't be enough, but everyone can do it very quickly. Say again? What? Well, what is wrong? Things are going down 20 years. Therefore, we are going, I hope, we are actually going to build green technologies. If you or someone invest in that and have them at the ready when the world starts to demand them, you will do well. It gives the proper incentive. Well, look, there's different ways of looking at it. You can look at it like we're fighting a war, which I do think is, by the way, a reasonable way to think about it. That takes that kind of effort. And that's directed at the top. This is what we're going to do. I don't care what you say. This is what we're closing down the car plants. We're going to turn them into wind farm, wind turbine factory, whatever. So you can do that kind of thing, too. And I think we should do some measure of that. But in the meantime, till we do, it seems to me that actually private industry is doing the most with some government incentives. That's the way it's set up right now. By the way, in places like China, they're just telling people what to do. Not enough. One of our companies is doing something. Again, it's only part of the solution. It's not going to be enough, but it's part of the solution. There's a couple scientists I know. One's out of Columbia, and I forget where the other guy is out of. And it's really just in a research stage right now. Columbia is one of the. Yeah, that's an early. By the way, it doesn't look like that now. That's an early artist rendering, but it gives you the idea.